Ecclesiastes 3 will be what we discussed this morning for our first session. So I invite you to open your Bibles to that passage. And in a moment, we're going to lead up to the context of Ecclesiastes 3:11, which is a famously quoted passage where it says, "He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, He has put eternity into man's heart." Now, I'm not asking for the right answers. I'm just asking for what you guys have heard before. Whenever you've heard people say, He's put eternity in our hearts, what have you heard people say that this means? Yeah, we know there's some instinctive thing within us where we know that there's some kind of afterlife. Any other things you'd add to that, or is that pretty well sum up what you guys have heard about that before? Yes, a deep longing for something beyond the things of this life, something like that. And I'd say that we're going to add some meat to those bones when it comes to looking at the context of what this means, because there's a sense in which I think that's in the right ballpark. But when we see it in context, I think it adds a lot of value to what we're looking at. Now, I haven't shown this yet during these lessons, but if you wanted to think about how to structure and how to outline the book of Ecclesiastes, what we've been looking at these last couple days, there's a couple different ways you could outline the book. The first 11 verses give you the prologue, where somebody is introducing for us the words of Solomon. And then Solomon has this monologue or a sermon or something from 1:12 to 12:7. And in 12:8, the guy that introduces him now comes back on the stage, and he says that, Solomon says, "Vanity of vanity," says the preacher, "everything is vanity." And so that's one way that you could outline the book, is with a prologue, monologue, and then an epilogue. Another way you could think about it is chapters 1 through 6 is the demonstration that life under the sun is vain. And he does this in many different ways by demonstration. He shows by his own experience. And can you guys remember some of the 7 W's that Solomon tried to find fulfillment in? Whimsies, yeah. So the whimsical things, what else? Wealth, work, wisdom, women, wine. Yeah, being well known. Good, you guys, look at how great of students you guys are. Good, well done. And so the first 2 chapters are showing, by my own life experience, life under the sun is vain. Then beginning around chapters 3 through 6, he starts making observations. You start seeing terms like, "I saw," or "I observed this," or "I looked out and this is what I noticed." And so it's like in chapters 1 and 2, this is my experience, but now I'm sitting in the lawn chair and I'm looking around all around me, and other people are having the same experiences as well. And so we're going to be looking at the beginning of that section in 3:1 through 15. And then there's other ways beyond what we're looking at in these lessons. Chapters 7 through 12, deliverance from vanity. Because life under the sun is filled with vanity, what's the best way that we can try to live and find fulfillment? And God gets interjected into that at different points. But the last lesson during the worship period, we're going to look at a passage in chapters 11 and 12. I say here that it's a little bit more optimistic. The sermon might seem a little pessimistic at first, but it's all towards an optimistic end, which is in a lot of ways what all of Ecclesiastes is doing. So I figured that as long as we're doing 5 lessons on Ecclesiastes, at some point it would be good to get this overall idea of what's happening in the book. But for the purposes of what we're doing right now, we're going to zero in on chapter 3. And I want to read verses 1 through 8 to get us started as we build up to verse 11. "For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. Now, as we look at these contrasts, I think there's 14 of them, something like that. You look at all of these and, okay, you got a time to be born, a time to die. That kind of encompasses the totality of life, birth and death. So it starts out with a pretty comprehensive thing, and then a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. You know, maybe a time to destroy something and then a time to plant a garden or something like that. Time to kill and a time to heal, capital punishment or a doctor helping. And you could go on and look at all of these different contrasts and make all kinds of interesting observations from them. But notice in verse 1, what is the term that he uses to describe these contrasting periods of time? Season. All right, so I grew up in Minnesota, and it was basically one season, and the season lasted 18 months out of the year. And the season was called winter, and every now and then we wouldn't have winter, and none of us could control it. For this text to open up by saying that there are different seasons, as I think one of the points of this is it shows that there are things in your life that you have no control over. And just like we don't have season control over that, we don't have seasons of time. We don't know when it's a time to be born or a time to die. We can't control any of that. A time to mourn and a time to dance. I mean, if a loved one passes away or some kind of difficulty comes into your life, it's not like you chose when to mourn. It was like these things happened. And so you have very little control over this sort of thing. But at the same time, we want things to be permanent, but they're not. We want to always be on the good side of things. We try to manipulate our lives to be on the sunny seasons. And then these other seasons come crashing in on us, and it's like we've got no control over those things, just like we wouldn't have control over the seasons. Now, I'll say also, this text is not advocating morally for any of these things. It's not saying that you should go seek out times to kill and times to heal necessarily. It's saying that these are things that crash in on you that you have no control over. All right, so that's the first set of contrasts. Notice the next set here. He keeps talking about a time to embrace, a time to refrain from embracing. Sometimes tough love is necessary, but again, that really has no bearing on what you decide to do. It's kind of what everybody else is deciding to do that has that effect on what you should be thinking. Now, I like what Derek Kidner says about this. Whatever may be our skill and initiative, our real masters seem to be these seasons. Not only those of the calendar, but that of tide of events, which moves us now to one kind of action which seems fitting, now to another which puts it all into reverse. All right, I'm just going to open this up for really vague. Did I say that in the right way, or is my Minnesota coming out? Really nebulous comments. Any just initial observations that you see about this as we're working towards what it means that eternity is in our heart? And maybe there's already some things going on in the back of your mind about how this would inform us what he means by eternity has been set in our hearts. Any observations that you guys want to make from the first 8 verses here? Yeah.
He talks a lot later about wisdom, or wisdom a person has to make the decision of what season it is and what action is called for, the better they can maneuver this life, even though it's
Yeah. And one thing we can see from this with these seasons is right now, if you've been going through a period of great joy, what is very possibly in your future? A time of mourning. And if you've been going through a deep time of mourning right now, what is very possibly in your future? Seasons change. It's not always the same. And so even though we would like to organize our life and manipulate our life so that everything's always very, very happy, what inevitably ends up happening? Things that are outside of our control that take the joys away from us, at least momentarily. And we, just like the wave comes crashing in on the beach, these things keep crashing in on you. And sometimes it's peaceful, and sometimes it's not. And this gets us into what he's going to say in 9 through 15. And so look at 9 through 15. Actually, we're going to read 9 through 11 to begin. What gain has the worker from his toil? I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. All right, remember when we looked at the question of gain in chapter 1, verse 3, what's the gain of all the toil that somebody toils under the sun? What's left over? He asks this same question here again in chapter 3, verse 9. What gain has the worker from his toil? When he says in verse 10, I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with, what is he saying here in the context? Yeah, God is in control, and he's given us the busy task of dealing with these seasons in life. That, yeah, the world is in such a way now after sin that he's given the world in such a way where there's going to be these good times and these bad times. God designed the world at this point, or he allows the world to be that way. But eventually in this text, he will make everything beautiful. So you might say, well, why has he put me in this world that is having these back and forth, back and forth? Okay, eventually he's going to make all things beautiful, and I don't understand what all that means and everything. But that gets us into what it means that eternity is in our hearts. And I think it's important to point out that when he says eternity is in our hearts, this is a complaint. This is not him saying, well, look at this beautiful reality about all of us. It's a complaint. It's a frustration. Well, because I would really like things to always be good. I would always like things to be happy. I would always like the sun to be out, but things can't always be San Diego. And so he's frustrated that he's put this desire in me that this world will never satisfy. Now, another way to say this is God has given us a desire that's out of reach under the sun. He's put us in a world, and we're within our hearts. Now, I'll ask this question now. As we start to unpack the context, what does he seem to be saying that eternity is in our hearts? What was that? Yeah, it's the business of God. What else? Yeah, longing for something better, something permanent, something with no shifting seasons. Eternity in the context means I want things to be firm, fixed, stable, and sunny. But I live in a world where it's not always that way. And notice also in verse 11, let me read all of verse 11 again. There's a lot going on in this verse. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. What do you make of that last part? Man cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end? Right. Yeah. We would like to know what the big picture of everything is. We would like to know how things begin and end. We've got this craving to understand everything in its deepest way possible. And throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, he'll say, yeah, wisdom has its benefits, but there's a lot of things that wisdom and knowledge will never be able to answer. So I think another part of what he means by having eternity in our hearts is I want things to be permanent and good. I want things to be stable in an eternal kind of way. And I also would like to see the big picture of things, but neither of those desires are ever satisfied because there's the happy seasons and there are the negative seasons, and I just keep getting knocked off my horse and I never can really get riding like I would like to. Any comments or reflections on what he said? Yeah. 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 Good. Good. Yeah. Right.
We know. I don't know that he ever told me.
Right. And do you think it would have been critical for Job to, like when God comes and he takes Job on the trip to the zoo and he says the ostrich, you ever thought about the ostrich and look at these dinosaur-like things and all this sort of thing? Do you think you'd be like, okay, like Job, let me just talk straight with you. Satan came and challenged me, and I thought that it would be a good idea to. Do you think it would be helpful for you to know all the answers to all the things that you want to know? Remember in Habakkuk chapter 1, where Habakkuk is saying, God, what are you going to do about all the violence and oppression in our nation? I want answers. And then God says, okay, I'm going to take a bitter and hasty nation, and just like a child can scoop up sand on the beach and take thousands upon thousands of grains of sand, the Babylonians are like that. They're going to scoop up a bunch of you guys and take you all away captive. And then when he gets the answer, he goes, oh, great. Okay, I'm really thankful that I know the answer to that. What does he do in the book? I don't know that I like the answer. And so we've got this desire to know, well, what's the answer to this, and how come this, and how come that thing happened, and why? Remember what Deuteronomy 29:29 says? God has given, there's secret things that belong to God, but he's given you the things that what? That you need to know for obedience. Did Job need to know what happened behind the curtains? No. What he needed to do was respond the right way. And so how do we live in such a way where we have these desires? God built us with this desire with eternity. We want things to be permanent and fixed and stable and sunny. And we want to understand things. And and God has put us in this mysterious world that has these different seasons. It would be like, if I can use like an illustration that's still going to miss the point, but maybe get in the right. Imagine that you got some kind of like a pet turtle or goldfish or something, and you got the wrong aquarium for it. And you put it in the aquarium, and it was like frustrated. And you're like, hey, turtle, you quit it. Like, you'd be happy in this little aquarium that... It's like God allows us to be in a place that we're not fully suited for. Well, why would he do that? And by the way, before we keep unpacking this, I will say that as this passage is classically used, there is still an evangelistic benefit to understanding what this passage is saying. Every non-Christian you know, this is true about them. They have desires for things to be good and permanent, and they want answers to things. And this world will never provide all of those things to them. But we happen to know something and somebody that can help with some of those things. And so we're going to keep moving through the text, though. You guys have any thoughts or comments before we move on, though? All right. So notice from 12 to 15... Solomon is going to have two perceptions. In verse 12, how does he begin? What's the first words of verse 12? I perceived. What's the first words of verse 14? I now perceived. So in light of these changing seasons, in light of the desires that we have in our heart that this world won't satisfy, he has two perceptions. And at this point, we should be really curious what these perceptions are. So look at 12 to 15. I perceived that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. I perceived that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. God has done it so that people fear before him. That which is already has been, that which is to be already has been, and God seeks what has been driven away. All right, the first perception we don't need to spend as much time on. We've talked a little bit about this yesterday. What do you make of what he's saying in verses 12 and 13? Why does he say here, rejoice, enjoy the good, take pleasure in toil? Yeah. Yeah, like, enjoy what you can. Like, if you're so fixated on big picture things that you will never know the answer to, you see that there's things right in front of you that you could still enjoy. Why are you letting these big picture things and your desire to have answers to everything and for things to... You can't even enjoy your meal right now. And I understand that there would be deep times of mourning where it's hard to enjoy anything. I get that. But I think this is talking about in regular circumstances, don't be so fixated on a bunch of things that you're never going to know the answer to, that you can't even enjoy practical, everyday kinds of things. God wants us to do that. So, though we can't see the big picture, God will give us this contentment if we seek Him. So that's the first perception. But the next one is the one that I want to spend more time with. What does he say the next perception is in verses 14 and 15? Yeah, yes, and so what should we do? We should fear God. What? How does that help us? Yeah, and if we don't, we might not know the answers to everything. We might not know, we won't know the answers. And we build our lives and we have all these things in our life that we want them to be exactly like how they are right now, and then something's going to cause them to crash and everything. We can't know the answers to all that, but what can we know? We can know the God who knows everything. We can know the God who holds the future in His hands. We can know the God who created everything and allows the world to be the way that it is. And so it reminds me of a time when I was in college. And there was a girl that I was friends with, and she had a boyfriend who used to smoke marijuana. And they broke up because of his habit. And then when we were talking, she was like, hey, I think I'm going to get back together with this guy. I'm like, okay. And she's like, but I'm only going to do it if he promises me to not smoke again. And I'm like, okay, well, we'll see how that works. And so a couple months later, I was at college, and she texted me, and she said, hey, I need to meet with you right now. I need to talk. And so I met her on campus, and she was crying, and she said, I don't know what to do. He started smoking again. And she said, what should I do? Why is this happening to me? I want things to be permanent and fixed and stable in a good kind of way. What do you say to somebody like that? Every time you have your heart get attached to things that can pull away, and this is the thing that means everything to me, and it pulls away from you, if your heart has been sewn together with that thing, it leaves your heart ripped open as well. And so what you need to do is start fearing God above everything else. It doesn't mean that you won't have things in life that hurt. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't cry. There was another time when I was in Minnesota, and every night around the dinner table, Mom and Dad telling me that I've joined a cult, Mom and Dad telling me that I shouldn't trust the Bible, and when I told them that I was thinking about preaching, that really didn't go well. And it was like one of those nights before, it was like World War III around the dinner table. And I went to bed crying, and I was frustrated, and I didn't understand why this was happening. And I get to school the next day, and there's a friend of mine, we get out of our cars around the same time, and we're walking into the campus. And she goes, and she was like really religious, like denominational, but really religious. And she's like, how are you doing today? And I said, I'm really not doing so well. And she like scolded me and said, well, every day should be happy in the Lord. Oh, that was really helpful. Thank you for letting me know that. Is it okay for Christians to cry? Yes. And if you never have tears or emotions, it's like, well, do you love people, and do you try to do good for the kingdom? And so we're not saying that emotions are bad and all that sort of thing, but it's saying this desire for eternity. This world is never going to be permanent, fixed, and stable, but can you know a God who is? This world is not going to have all the answers to everything, but can you draw near to the God who knows everything? When he says in this text basically that every generation is going to be subjected to these seasons. And so all of these things, the insecurity that we find in this world should drive us to fear the one that we can know. Now, any thoughts or comments on that? We're about to have some more discussion questions in just a moment. Yeah. Right. Right. Isn't there some like Arab proverb that says all all sunshine and no rain makes a desert or something. Like, ooh, that's deep. Look at the end of verse 15. And God seeks what has been driven away. I think what he means in the context is one season leaves, but then he seeks to bring that season back. And you go back to the good times and the bad times, and this is just the way that it is. I like this quote from C.S. Lewis. Creatures are not born with desires unless satisfaction for those desires exist. A baby feels hunger, well, there is such a thing as food. A duckling wants to swim, there is such a thing as water. If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. If none of my earthly pleasures satisfy it, that does not prove that the universe is a fraud. Probably earthly pleasures were never meant to satisfy it, but only to arouse it to suggest the real thing. There are desires that we have in this life that will never be reached. And all of this is by God's intention so that we seek him and we draw near to him, and that we find that security found only that can only be found in him. All right, anything you want to say about that one? At the risk of over-quoting this one, Augustine, thou hast made us for thyself, and our heart is restless till it rests in thee. Is what the world is just constantly going back and forth, and the only way that you're ever going to find rest is if you rest in the God who holds eternity and knows eternity. Now, let's drive this home with a couple more discussion questions. What can trials or bad seasons teach us? Yeah, good. You're like 2 Corinthians 1, you're now equipped to be able to help other people through the suffering that you've gone through and the comfort that you've received from God. Good. What else? Yeah. Yes, the God who raises the dead, which means that Paul, even in 2 Corinthians 1, needed to learn to trust God even more than he already did before that moment. Good, yeah. Yes. Yeah, good. Like if there was no discipline. And then there's always the question of how do I discern what discipline is versus like things that just happen in life too. And that's I think in the context of Hebrews, what's the discipline that the audience is receiving? Persecution for being Christians. And so, but yeah, very good. What else? Yes. How many of us want to be perfect, complete, lacking nothing? Oh yeah, like that sounds really great. Okay, well, what's the channel by which that happens? Well, you have to go through trials and be steadfast in them. Have you ever noticed that the sensation of working out, you feel like you're getting weaker? So like, I think it's probably pretty obvious that I work out. So, like, I know by experience, you know, that if you're lifting weights, like you're doing, why is that so funny? It's true. You know, I know. If you're lifting weights, you're like on your 10th rep or whatever they call these things, and like, oh, okay, 5, that was easy. 6, that was okay. It's getting a little harder. 10, I feel like I'm getting weaker. Why is it the case that when you're working out, the sensation you get is that you're getting weaker? Because you're tearing your muscles, and is by being steadfast in the discipline. And so one of the things that trials and seasons can teach us is that, yeah, God is using this, not that this is necessarily the reason he brought this into your life, but one of the things that you can take away from it is it's changing me, it's making me grow if I remain steadfast, if I never stop the reps and all that sort of thing. So, good. What else can trial? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, this life is not yours. And the seasons in life should show you that. By the way, I'm not the kind of preacher that wants to have everything start with the same letter. But in the book of Job, there are 4 things that begin with the letter F that Job has not work out for him. His finances, his family, his flesh, and his friends. And I didn't even have to push any of those, right? Like they all started with the letters, so that was really good. And so for Job, these different seasons that happen in him, what is it that he learns throughout the book of Job? What was that? Yeah, depend on God. Anything else you guys want to say about this one? Yeah. Right. Yeah, good. What else? Anything else that you guys want to share that you've like personally learned from as you try to reconcile this eternity that's in your heart but living in a world that's not going to fit that desire? Austin?
Sense in which it makes you get rid of shallow understandings of God and like really sit there and face and endure having to switch that to the correct understanding of God and correct understanding of the world that we live in.
Like shallow understandings of God being like I should have this or that in life or whatever, and why isn't it happening? And yeah, okay, good. Yeah, AJ?
It drives home the point that this world is not our home.
Right.
There's a perfect home comparison of which you don't have to ever go to that seat. That's not your.
Yes, and this is why this passage about eternity in your hearts is a powerful evangelistic tool still. Is like, you know, every non-Christian around you is designed with this desire for things to be permanent and stable and fixed and to see the big picture of things, and they can't. And everybody's scrambling to this political view to try to understand those things, or that political view, or this environmental view, or this philosophy. Everybody's scrambling to something that they fear and respect, that in their mind will make sense of the world that we live in. And all of those worldviews are inadequate. The only one that's adequate is Christianity. And so we've got a very powerful thing that we can share with other people. But the sufferings in life should be training you and teaching you that you should yearn for God. Anything else you guys want to say about that? Yes. Well, and I think about what happened even with my family, and it's like with my mom and dad printing out articles from all these atheist websites, and I was like, okay, I got to get answers to all these things on why they don't believe in the Bible, because they might want to know the answers, which they never wanted to. And I started finding people in college who had the same questions, and it was like my mom and dad were training me to start answering questions of people that actually wanted to know answers. So then there was times where I would baptize somebody, and I would always, I don't like do the waiter things. I don't know. I'll get into a swimming shirt and swimming trunks or whatever. And so I'd have a plastic bag, and I'd with the wet clothes in it, and I'd have to sneak it inside so mom and dad didn't know that I had baptized somebody. There was one time I got caught, and so it's like the weirdest teenage rebellion. But in hindsight, I didn't okay, notice the follow-up question though. What prevents us from learning the lessons? What mindsets or attitudes prevent us from learning the lessons that we're supposed to learn? Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, good. And that's what I think this text is doing in Ecclesiastes 3. Fear God. You're not going to have all the answers in life. Have your perspective calibrated the right way. Good. What else? Yeah.
Let me go back up. All of the things in verses 2 that say this is kind of full.
Yep.
But the second part of verse 1 says, the time is every person under heaven. We think of all these things happening on earth. There's a purpose for the human.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a heavenly goal or purpose to these things.
Did you recognize?
Yeah. Good. What else? Yeah.
Sometimes we just get the sense that we deserve to only have good times. It feels unfair for bad things to happen and shame.
Yeah. When the Israelites were wandering in the wilderness, was God giving them everything they wanted? Was that by design? Why? For them to learn to trust in God, to reveal the impurities of their heart, to see what was in their heart. But one of the things that happened when they were in the wilderness is they kept grumbling. And if you look at Numbers 11 through 21, with the 40-year period that they're in the wilderness in the Old Testament, there is a series of 7 times they complain. And there's a cool structure to what they're doing and everything. Like Moses fails to intercede for 2 of those instances, and the things that they complain about end up centering on complaining about their leadership with Korah's rebellion. But the word for grumble or complain literally means to lodge, like you're staying at a hotel or like a dwelling place. So what does it mean to grumble or complain? It means that you're stuck in the past. Why? I just wish things were this way, and why can't it be this way, and before COVID, and blah, 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 and how come things like that way that person treated me, and this happened. If you're constantly lodged in the past, we've got a worldview that talks about striving forward. Which worldviews ever benefit the person by just constantly looking backwards? Like probably none of them. And so one of the mindsets that prevent us from learning the lessons that we need to learn is the constant complaining. Like I was building my life the way that I wanted it to, but then this season came and it knocked those things down. Well, there's nothing you can do to change the past. There's nothing you can do. And so that's what's happened. And so the question is now, how do I roll forward with the best mindset that I can have? I thought there's some other hands over here.
Paul talks to the Philippians about one thing he talks about those whose God is their belly
Yeah.
and who set their mind on earthly things. They don't fear God, and what's here is all there is.
Yes. Good. Austin, did you have something?
And it kind of from what we talked about this weekend already, but like the constant diversion, or looking to one thing or another, you're just done the pain.
Yes. Yes. You could prevent it.
You could also go through a trial and get nothing.
Right. Yes. Good. What else on this one? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. If we keep a under the sun perspective, God, the perspective of fearing God and acknowledging that He's there is going to prevent so many of these false worldviews to start affecting you in such negative ways, like we've been talking about the last couple of days. But yeah, good. What else? What was that? Yeah. Right. Yeah, and what was God giving the Israelites when they were in the wilderness? He gave them shoes that didn't wear out. Like the best Nikes don't even do that. And when they had that time in the wilderness, God was still leading them. He could have just left them all alone, but He was leading them still. So there are always things that we, in the moment, kind of things that we can enjoy and be happy for. By the way, what did manna taste like? Honey. Where were they going to? A land flowing with what? It was like God was giving them a taste of where they were going. And it sounded like in Numbers 11, like they could do some pretty cool stuff with manna. But I suppose even any of us, if we had to eat the same thing every day, we would be tempted to complain. But we still got to be thankful people. So, all right. Anything else you guys want to say about this? Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And as opposed to the pride of, I'm going to build my life exactly how I want it, and then you're not realizing that God made this world to have seasons that are out of your control. Good. Yeah. No, this is after the fall. Absolutely. Yeah. So, but does God allow the world to continue in this way with sin having ruptured everything? Yeah. And in His providence, does He allow it to be that way to teach us that this broken world will never satisfy us, so yearn for God? Yeah. 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 Yeah, that God is going to do something. Like one day, all of the desires of your heart are going to be found in God. But you've been looking for it in prostitutes. You've been looking for it in video games. You've been looking for it in sports. You've been looking for it in wealth. You've been looking for all these things that are going to pull away from you at some point. I'm a big Philadelphia Eagles fan, and they lost the Super Bowl, and that was a bummer. And so, like, if you try to put all of your eggs in these baskets, they're all going to keep crushing your heart again and again and again. If you fear God, there'll still be real pain and real tears in this life, but you still have the God that's created everything that you're with. And so, I'll end with this passage in 2 Corinthians 4:17 and 18. This light momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, as we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. And I think this is what Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 14 and 15 is getting at. You fear God. Quit trying to find fulfillment in all of these things that this world was never able to give you to begin with. So our time is up. We end at 9:45. You do, right? All right, so I will too. All right. Thanks for the good discussion.